So it all leads to this, the end of the line, where the Showa era ends. It's been a fun 21 years in getting up to this point, developing Godzilla, movies covering various messages from nuclear weapons, pollution, while spanning a wondrous roster of mini kaiju, even bringing King Kong into the series at one point. Sure, his run under Toho's banner was short-lived, but it was memorable. We also brought in several alien races, attempting to conquer planet Earth. With all their might, their monster technologies overpowering man, there was something still in the way that they completely underestimated. That was Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Once our menace turned into our hero, fending off any opposing force that dared face him. Many tried, but the result was all the same, failure. But there was one alien race that was insistent on taking our planet, keenly watching as we polluted our damaged planet. The Black Hole Planet 3 aliens sought to own our own planet for themselves, even if they'd failed on the last mission that they had even tried in 1974. You see, to them Earth was vital to their race. It was a chance for a new beginning, as their homeworld was slowly fading, engulfed by a black hole. They now return in Terror of MechaGodzilla, returning with their mechanical titan of terror, but this time they are not alone. Join us as we journey into the end of an era. Terror of MechaGodzilla is a very different movie than its predecessor. Oddly enough, and interestingly enough, this was the first movie in a long time to feature Ishiro Honda at helm of directing a Godzilla movie. To be exact, his last Godzilla movie was Godzilla's Revenge. Now, this movie, even though it does shift towards the darker tones, and I do want to say these darker tones are probably some of the more darker tones since the original Godzilla movie, but that's not to say this movie is without its typical classic Godzilla battles that we saw and first arrived in King Kong vs. Godzilla. You know, the ones where the monsters that basically have human characteristics? Yeah, that's all maintained in this movie, so I feel like we're getting the best of both worlds in terms of the human dialogue and the way our monsters present themselves. I mean, really, we can't do without it. People love the colorful off-the-wall battles that the Showa era just brings. Now, unfortunately, this would be the last movie for a while that we'd be doing that, because the following movies in the next era will go ahead and put the aspect away. However, though, we will see some of that creep back into the Godzilla series. But it remains intact here, and there's plenty of it here for the fans, in fact. This movie also reverses a certain formula we saw introduced in the last movie. You see, in the last movie, remember, Godzilla was at the advantage with King Caesar and Godzilla taking on MechaGodzilla, and yeah, they kind of got whipped around constantly by MechaGodzilla, and MechaGodzilla, as I said, is completely overpowered and could have killed Godzilla alone, but this time around, it's now 2v1, and Godzilla is going at it alone. No Jet Jaguar, no Anguirus, no King Caesar, nothing. Godzilla alone as a kaiju is going into battle. Not since Mothra vs. Godzilla has the numbers game been against Godzilla, but now it's all been flipped. And yeah, there was a short period where the battlefield was even for 2 movies, but here we've got MechaGodzilla, who's had a few upgrades along the way, and there's certain things and certain tricks that Godzilla tried out in the last movie that just won't work this time. It's a little different. And there's an extra element added to the game that kind of changes up how this battle and this movie will progress versus the last movie. Alright, so let's talk the actual movie, shall we? This movie begins following up the events of the last movie. A search begins underway for the remains of MechaGodzilla at the bottom of the sea. Within no time, a mysterious new kaiju attacks the submarine. This is our introduction to Titanosaurus, who will serve a major role and part of the plot of this movie. Now, look, I want to be clear. I understand that as a mad scientist, that obviously this guy's logic has long went out the door. I mean, if you're willing to work with an alien race, I mean, yeah, it's gone. But Dr. Mifune was once considered a respected scientist, but he was cast away by his colleagues. He was looking to control forms of life in the ocean, makes the discovery of Titanosaurus, which he has the full intent of controlling. He is now considered insane, cast away. Furthermore, one of his experiments jeopardized the life of his daughter, Katsura, who is nearly killed. Eventually, she is saved by mysterious men who turn into a cyborg. Now, here's the thing. To add to this, the control of MechaGodzilla is now inside of her. She now controls MechaGodzilla through her emotions. Her rage and anger and everything now controls and fuels and runs MechaGodzilla. Because of this, MechaGodzilla's personality is quite different than the last movie, in which we saw him introduced in Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla. So, this is a general observation out of me. I feel like MechaGodzilla's behavior in this movie is a bit more reserved compared to the last movie, and I feel like there'd be points where he's kind of in the background as far as destroying the city and Titanosaurus is just doing whatever. But the thing is, though, despite that, MechaGodzilla is never forgotten in this entire movie, because when he shows up and attacks, boom, just deadly in this movie. And he is definitely a force to be reckoned with, possibly stronger than the last time as well. It's something that I've always noticed, and it actually helps further sell MechaGodzilla as a soulless machine, which in my opinion, does this movie several favors. Put this all together with the grim soundtrack in this movie is very different than its predecessors before it. Now I want to kind of consider something. Before I watched this movie and kind of gave a little review and kind of thought about it, I want to go ahead and mention this. I stopped and thought, is this movie better than Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla? Now, I don't want to turn this into a movie face-off. That's not the goal of this video. This is just kind of my opinion and kind of my thoughts of how I view this movie. But I will say there's certain aspects that I definitely love more than the last movie. However, I will say that doesn't stop me from saying that I do think I prefer Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla. Maybe that's nostalgia speaking on my end because of the fact I saw that movie before this one. I went ahead and ran a poll, and I thought it was interesting. By a small margin, Terra MechaGodzilla actually won, which was interesting, and I feel like it was going to be a gimme that Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla probably would have won. I can't find a lot of weaknesses with this movie, but if anything though, as far as like the action goes, it takes a good hour before any battles take place, which is a real weakness I gotta point out. But when it does happen though, it feels worth it, due to the fact that, dare I say, this dammit might be one of the best introductions that we will see for Godzilla. Pure silence. After Titanosaurus is attacking, he's looking around you, seeing it through his point of view. If you pay attention closely, you will see a silhouette arise slowly, atomic breath out of nowhere. Godzilla is here. He will not let Titanosaurus replace him as the greatest kaiju to rise out of the ocean. But all the build-up pays off at the end once we get MechaGodzilla and Titanosaurus working together completely in sync. Godzilla's got to figure out something. The city is getting destroyed, he's getting wrecked himself, he's got no King Caesar who's setting this one out. No magnetic powers, he needs something. Godzilla, King of the Monsters, what can he depend on? He needs an intervention, and that intervention is supersonic waves, which just turned out and just so happen to be Titanosaurus' weakness. Now is the time for Godzilla to focus on his cyber counterpart and just unload. He's capable of destroying him, and he will. But it's going to take more than the last time. He's going to do more than just ripping off MechaGodzilla's head, because there's been some upgrades since last time. He's still fully operational, even with his head gone. The job isn't quite done yet, because unfortunately the source must be killed, Katsura. The humans with Interpol overwhelm the black hole aliens controlling her, wound her. In the process, this leads to Katsura committing suicide, ending the misery, ending all the suffering. In the process, MechaGodzilla is also deactivated. Now is the time for Godzilla to strike and finish the bionic monster off for good. Then, he has to turn focus to Titanosaurus, who had no business being part of this in the first place. You see, this movie has a lot more going for it than Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla. The darker tone, which I do welcome back. There's just more components in the bag that this movie has and requires for the viewer to watch and to pay attention to as it goes on. The last movie, though, pretty linear. It's still a fun movie. Like I said, I don't want to turn this into a face-off, but I can't help but go that direction sometimes and compare them due to the fact that they are obviously the two MechaGodzilla movies in the Showa era. There's so many angles to look at this movie, whether it's an ultimatum that an alien race is dealing a mad scientist. He now feels obligated to help out the alien race due to the fact that they saved his daughter, the only thing that he loves. Maybe he's not truly insane, he still cares about his daughter even if she's only half human now. Here's the sad thing about this movie. It's probably one of the least successful Godzilla movies in terms of ticket sales. Extremely unfortunate. Does this mean this movie is terrible? Absolutely not. In fact, if you talk to most Godzilla fans about this movie, they'll hail it as one of the best Godzilla movies from the Showa era. The thing is though, the reality is, the Godzilla series was 21 years old by this point. 15 movies produced in 21 years. You gotta believe somewhere along the line that there was a little bit of Godzilla fatigue at the time of these movies coming out. The thing is, seeing Godzilla go off into the ocean, the last scene that we see him in the Showa era, is just as beautiful as the first time that we saw him. It was time for Godzilla to have a rest. For about a decade, we'll see him again. But for now though, this scene right here, extremely heartwarming, just watching Godzilla go into the ocean, knowing the final battle of the Showa era had been won, and he would be gone for 9 years and return in 1984. In closing, I'd like to extend a grand thank you to anybody involved that helped bring these movies to life, because guess what, the magic is very much still there watching these movies years later. I can still recall, back in 96, 97, running to my room, grabbing my Trendmaster's Godzilla and watching every Godzilla that I could on the Sci-Fi Channel at the time. These movies are so brilliant. It doesn't matter whether you're laughing at it, whether it's the cheese, whether it's the action, no matter what, you find something to enjoy. There's something just magical in every aspect. Even in the movies I like a little bit less, there's still something about those movies. We're done with the Showa era, but there's one surprise stop that I want to make before we return to Godzilla. I mean, quite literally, return to Godzilla. Because in 1976, we want to make a stop because we have King Kong, which returned to theaters for the first time in years and more of a US release. King Kong 1976 review coming your way. Thank you for joining me. Like, subscribe. I absolutely adore you guys. Peace.